Okay. I joined in October. So it's in the middle of pandemic. I never actually got a chance to catch up. Good to see you. Good to see you here as well. Yeah, I see that as well.
Hi, I think we have met.
I do. It was sent on the email yesterday. It's also on the ICTS webpage. Actually, Zoom ID might not be there on the webpage. I'll send it to you. I just sent it to your NCR address. What are the movements? Nice. I didn't realize that.
I asked. Yeah. Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
So are we all supposed to join Zoom?
Join the meeting, yes.
Okay, okay.
Oh, thank you. He's not coming. He's supposed to start. He's coming. But okay. Just wait.
I thought you would be, no? Yeah. Ah, that's weird. we were wondering whether you are here in person or not.
Just keep it. Check. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm really sorry. Can you hear me? Everyone here can hear me? Girish, can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah, I can hear you, Shravan. Hi.
Apologies for being late. Sorry, the flight was a little delayed. But let me begin right away. I'm glad to see so many of you have joined us, and I'm excited to be discussing this new initiative with you. So I give you a brief introduction about what about my vision for this and TIFR's vision for this. And we have a number of industry participants as well who will also give their visions for their sort of collaborations with TIFR. And yeah, so the broad meeting is basically about trying to find common ground, because we do both have to, both industry and academia have to sort of take steps towards each other to try to find topics and try to find a mechanism through which these ideas can be enabled. And I think it's going to be very productive if we can do this. So anyway, so let me begin and lay out the case for why I think it's important. And I'm sure many of you probably already have arrived independently at the same conclusion. So let me start. Okay, so we know mid-career for many of us, the machine learning has just come along and just changed the entire dynamics of what we do. So, I turned 40 last year, so it's like the carpet has been pulled from under my feet, midway. And so this all of our methods of 20th century methods, late 20th century, early 21st century, 19th century, all of these methods have, very powerful as they are, but now we've realized that with advances in sort of data, with a collection, with advances in computing, storage, and processing power, these new machine learning methods have just become extraordinarily powerful. And as long as you know how to wield them appropriately, right? Of course, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So you need to be super careful when you use machine learning. So in particular, machine learning can map extremely complex parameter spaces, landscapes of really really rough landscapes where where things physical processes are taking place, and it's able to do very powerful interpolation internally in the space, and it allows you to sort of merge very different types of data together to deal with them and to synthesize broader conclusions from this. So this is one major thing that's occurred to many of us. The fact that machine learning is so important. The other thing is that companies or corporations or commercial enterprises basically are able to pay these extraordinary salaries, right, for machine learning experts, which certainly institutions like TIFR can't afford to. And so they have, they've become powerhouses of machine learning talent. And as a consequence, some of the most important machine learning breakthroughs in recent times have actually occurred in corporations, no longer at universities. Not no longer, but they have not happened at universities at certainly the same scale. So, I mean, the classic example is protein folding, right? That you've all heard about. So DeepMind is one such company, or one such institution. But there's Google Research, Microsoft Research, many research divisions of companies, from whom you'll hear later today. And so they're really tackling many of the problems that we at universities are also tackling. And so it's important, I think, for us to try to merge our efforts, or certainly be aware of each other and coordinate perhaps, and so on. So I mean, the whole idea is that with powerful computer science, now disciplinary advances in all of our disciplines in computer science are now tightly connected. So as I said, the idea is to try to find common ground between industry and academia, and saying how are we going to try to work together. We have very different sets of priorities. We have very different sets of deadlines and census of deadlines and product, so on and so forth. People have very different views on things, but there is common ground to be had, as many institutions abroad have certainly displayed, right? I mean, there are consortia now, there have been consortia for many decades now, universities all over the West. And so it's not a thing that's been done in India so far. And certainly not in the structure that I'm presenting now. So it's sort of one of the first times that we're doing something like this. I don't want to emphasize that this is the first consortium. There's nothing great about building a consortium. So perhaps I'm even mistaken. Perhaps there has been something that certainly I'm not aware of. But that's certainly not the point I want to emphasize. But it's certainly one of these experiments that needs to be conducted and hopefully will be successful. And so the idea is that companies which are interested put in, to the extent that is possible, an annual membership fee. So, for sufficiently large companies, I think this is not a big deal. For smaller companies that do want to collaborate with us, maybe we could consider different models where they say, look, people will work on these projects, and we can provide that type of support and so on. So anyway, this is something that's I think at the outset, at least, not so crucial, but certainly an important aspect of this whole idea. But one of the problems that a lot of companies find is that there are very few good data analysts, in the country in general, and so TIFR can bridge this gap, right? So we have a lot of very, very smart kids who come to work with us, and many of these kids perhaps could want to go to industry and work with industry, or certainly collaborate with them and so on. And so these companies will have access to our significant talent pool. And I think if we do have independent funding, our hiring levels will certainly be a lot higher. Not necessarily just for PhDs, but for master's students, potentially for postdocs, for shorter term positions and so on, but also PhDs. And okay, so that's the funding model. And the other thing I want to say is that this is the broad idea of the consortium, and the science model is that we want this to be interdisciplinary. Certainly, we at TIFR suffer from the problem of being very siloed in our work, right? So we all sort of do our own thing, and I think there ought to be a lot more talking between faculty members. And certainly, I feel this acutely. I'm happy with what I do, but I really do also want to collaborate with others on very different problems and so on. And TIFR gives you so much freedom in terms of time that I think we should make use of this very different types of expertise we have. And the idea is that there's one PI who says, okay, here's a problem. I propose this problem. This problem is significant. And so today we're going to hear a number of very interesting problems that people are going to propose. And this PI will say, I lead this, and we're responsible in some sense for the outcome, scientific outcome. And a number of students, postdocs, other faculty members say, well, this is, I'm in alignment with this idea. I would like to contribute to this, and so on. It's that particular aspect of it is somewhat the other people supporting this effort, and this could also include industry members, right? So some industry partners could say, well, I would also like to work on this, or some our people work on this, and so on. And so we'll have, this is my vision. Hopefully it'll pan out in some sense that we'll have periodic informal meetings that we'll all attend and learn about, and in terms of methods, and contribute to different ideas in science. It all sounds wonderful, of course, when you put it in a presentation, but the hope is that it will actually translate to reality, and that we have talks from competent people across the world who work on these problems. And TIFR has a good name, so we do have access to competent people abroad who are willing to spend time to help us construct this science and so on. So how is this funded, right? So this is really the ultimate question. And the way I see it is that we are already so well funded by the government. All of our salaries are generally taken care of, that we should really now try to seek money from private sources. This gives us the freedom to hire really good people and pay them, at a level that is commensurate, which government money doesn't really allow us to travel to conferences and so on, and it gives us freedom in disbursing these funds in a way that is, will optimize the kind of science that we do. And so so the annual budget will be, of course, set at some level by the number of companies that are participating. A number of companies have expressed interest. We have to translate this to them actually sending over checks. That I'm working on that in the background, and trying to move this ahead and so on. So I do require cooperation from all of you in some sense, in that the more support and help that I get from TIFR faculty, the easier it becomes for me to go to these companies and say, look, these people, this set of faculty members are seriously interested, so please help us in X, Y, Z way, right? So that's the general idea. The president of Simons Foundation, whom I happen to know is Professor David Spergel, who's a very decorated astrophysicist, told me that we should apply. They have a targeted grant to institutions, so new institutions that are created in a variety of different places. They provide funding to the tune of $200,000 a year, and he said this sounds exciting. I mean, he didn't, of course, say that I'm going to fund this or anything, but there is an independent process by which all proposals are reviewed and so on. But he encouraged me strongly in a conversation that I had with him to apply for this. And so that's also a very generous budget. $200,000 a year, as you know, in India goes a long way. And so yeah, the idea that we have is that we use these funds to have a number of good postdoctoral named postdoctoral positions, for instance. I'm also simultaneously trying to round up some endowment, but endowment's a bit harder because I feel like we need to get it off the ground a little bit before I can start telling someone that, look, and there's all this stuff, right? In a few years, you can also name this whole initiative and stuff, but that all comes much later. But so we have really good postdoctoral positions, which some committee internally can be set up to decide on. Then so this nomination of PhD for this Prime Minister's Fellowship is a really nice thing. One of my students who's working on astrophysics, in fact, has been supported by Intel so it's a Prime Minister's Fellowship, and he's basically supported by Intel to try to work on projects that are connected to what I do, and Intel's interested in supporting this. So this is a good way for companies to support our PhD students. It's really good for them, it's really good for us, and so on. And so there's a number of other things which we would use these funds for. So I want to say we have an advisory board, not a governing board, but an advisory board. This advisory board already is very, very highly distinguished. It's not a complete board yet, but we will add more people in good time. I didn't want to rush because people are actually really interested in serving on this board. It's not a huge expenditure of their time, but problematic if I rush and populate the board with all these distinguished people and then we don't have anything to show for it. So I stopped at this stage where I wanted to make sure that we were actually progressing towards, getting this initiative, to realizing this initiative. And so we have the chief of science for a deep mind is kindly agreed to be on the board. The coup d'etat is Jan Nakoon, who is Turing Award, highly decorated Turing Award winner. He's very happy to help us. And he's the chief of science for Meta AI as well. So he's very interested in supporting our efforts through Meta. He's expressed it. I haven't really followed up with him, but in some good time I will. And we have David Spergel, I mentioned a second ago, and Katipalli Srinivasan is already associated closely with TIFR, very distinguished professor from NYU. So, okay, so we'll have other affiliates. We have science advisors, we have an industry council, and so on and so forth, which can all be populated, as I said, in good time, now perhaps too soon. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, I'll spend 3 minutes explaining my science, which is what all of you will do, and I'll sort of say what my science goals are. But does anyone have any questions on Zoom or here? Does this sound okay? I mean, people think it's exciting. I mean, or interesting. Okay, that's good. That's good. There's some head bobbing. Okay, it's good. Okay, so let me just then quickly round up, and then there's a please. Shivadi, please go ahead.
Shravan, thanks for organizing this. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question. What is the timeline you are thinking for setting this up?
Sorry, now I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I have a question here. The timeline you are thinking for setting this group or for the plans?
Timeline?
Yeah.
The timeline is like literally months from now, 2 months maybe. Or right now, actually. I mean, we can already start working on things. But money will, I'm hoping, flow in soon, in a month or two. Some initial money at least. So I have, I don't want to reveal them yet because the money is not yet come in, and they have their own internal processes, but certainly one major firm has already basically in the final stages of handing over some money. And others have already expressed significant interest. So I'm hoping a month for initial money to show up already, and then slowly after. But even that initial support will already see us be able to hire people and so on. So I think we should move to start creating internal structures like committees and so on to handle these problems. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit about my science, and then I'll stop at that point. So I do I'm a seismologist. I study the internal structure of the sun, stars, and Earth in that order of decreasing importance, or certainly training. And so the machine learning is increasingly starting to play a very important role in a lot of my work. So these are the broad topics that we're working on. So I just very quickly go through this. So today we observe stars, right? Thousands or hundreds of thousands of stars using all these space-based and ground-based instruments, and very sophisticated. All stars oscillate, so they're balls of gas that are pulsating. And the manner of pulsations will tell you a little bit of, just like, you hit a little metal sphere and you can hear its sound. So already, or you go in the room and you speak and you hear this, you can sort of estimate the size of the room, right? You can do extraordinarily sophisticated things by observing the pulsations of stars. And so the pulsations themselves are a time series for distant stars. You're observing a little point of light that's scintillating a little bit, right? It's fluctuating. And so if you do a Fourier transform modulus squared, so it's the power spectrum, which is the y-axis here, and the x-axis is temporal frequency. These are observations from satellites, as Kepler in particular. So these are red giants, right? And there's a very complicated spectrum of oscillations. It's showing all of these very complicated modes, different types of modes, gravity, buoyancy modes, and acoustic modes, and so on. And by interpreting all of these oscillations, you glean insight into the structure and the angular momentum transport and the rotation rates of these stars, which are extremely important in understanding stellar evolution, galactic archaeology, lots of very important astrophysics questions. But the current problem is that every star takes thousands of CPU cycles, can take thousands of CPU cycles, and enormous amounts of human intervention. And that's a problem, because when you look at 1 million stars, that's simply not feasible. So now we've already designed machines to achieve this speed up, which is a whopping 9 order of magnitude speed up at comparable accuracy. So 9 or 10 orders of magnitude speed. So milliseconds were observed. The entire Kepler field of red giants is analyzed in milliseconds or maybe seconds compared to like millions of CPU hours. It's an extraordinary achievement. And part of it is due to the fact that the field itself is very slow to embrace new methods. And people in the West really talk about using machine learning, but have simply not adopted it. And so now we've already discovered many interesting things about red giants that have not been known before. I won't get into it or anything, but I'm just saying it's a very, very powerful demonstration, at least to us. And we're leading this because, as I said, in the West, people have not moved for some strange reason fast enough to do this. So the other problem is deconstructing machines. And this is a very cutting edge area of machine learning called machine interpretation, to understand what machines are actually doing. And so one question when you live next to a star is, what is that star going to do to us, right? In terms of, there's a flare, if there's a burst of high energy particles that's streaming towards Earth. And so what you're seeing here is the emergence of new sunspots. Sunspots are large concentrations of magnetic flux. And when these magnetic fields reorient and reconnect and so on, they release powerful bursts of electromagnetic radiation, which, if directed unluckily towards us, can really take out some serious communication equipment and so on, and has in fact in the past done. So you saw this thing. It's an extraordinary depiction of very high quality data that we have, and this is just one movie, but we have like enormous amounts of data of this quality, very high quality data. A human being just simply can't look at all of this and make sense of it. And so the question is can you actually train a machine to, let's say, predict a solar flare, and then try to understand, because this is about physics. So what is the flare, going to do? What conditions lead to a flare and so on. So in particular, or for instance, you see this set of things that are emerging there to the right. That stuff goes away. Actually, that's a small magnetic flux concentration that actually ends up going away, with the stuff now that's come up becomes really big, right? So which sunspots make it, and which, why do they go away, and so on. Very important physics to understand, and also important practical applications. So this is Deus ex machina, which is not the correct usage of this Latin phrase, but it means God from the machine. So you use the machine, you discover new physics by training it. Although, as I said, the phrase is actually not. That's not the correct interpretation of that phrase, but okay. So one last slide, and I'm done. And so this is another. These are the number of instruments that you see here that are observing the sun. There's lots of different types of data and so on. And Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, and we want to go live in space and whatever, do all of these things. But so you need to know the solar conditions and space weather. And so we're trying to do this very, very ambitious, streamlining of all of these data using numerical simulations, called these physics-informed neural networks. These are special types of neural networks, and to create a big simulator. So NASA has talked about this for decades now. They want to incorporate all of this, but they haven't moved. And so we're hoping that in a year, we'll be able to get to this, to be able to at least assimilate a lot of these data. So we're already working on this, and that's a project as well. So I'm done with that. So I think Upi is next. Yes? Thank you. Okay, can we go to full screen? Hmm?
Why would you want to do that? Why don't you share the screen from this one? Okay. You want me to do it from my laptop? It's kind of backwards, no? Okay. It installed on that specifically to avoid this. Sorry about this. Should I come down there? Sit over there. I can be over there. Yeah. Second order issue. The thing is to share the screen.
Shall we go to Zoom?
Okay, do we see it? Okay, so I'm going to give a somewhat broad brush view of Neuro and AI. Neuro, of course, being the parent field. And it's been a somewhat contentious relationship over the decades, but I'll go somewhat lightly over that and give you an idea of sort of the broader areas and maybe one or two very specific examples. I think Adish is going to give us some more specific examples of where AI and machine learning apply to problems in neuroscience. Okay, this is not keen on shifting.
Excuse me a second. 1 second.
No, let me do it. I can do it. There. Okay, don't worry about it. Okay, so this beast is one component, maybe one node of a TPU from Google. And these things consume industrial power stations worth of power, and they occupy gigantic things, gigantic machine rooms. And this thing is in your head. It occupies 1.5 liters. It consumes 20 watts. Okay. Its capacity in many respects is still way beyond, and let's not even get into the issues of efficiency. And it certainly does some things, it still does some things a little bit better than AI, some things. Okay, so I'll give a very brief overview of how it does it. And I think the key to it is that the brain operates at many, many levels of physical function, chemical function, and mechanical, well, all these functions coincide across many scales. And I'll just sort of zoom in from this, 20 centimeter, 1.5 liter size thing down towards the some of the machinery that does the computation. So that's the brain as a whole. It's somewhere up at this level. One can take the size of a neuron, which is one cell in this structure, so about 0.5 millimeter. Let's zoom in onto that. So this is a computer model of a neuron, which is a pretty decent model. It's called a Purkinje neuron. This is 500 microns. Now let's zoom in somewhat more and look at a small piece of the computing machinery, the dendrite. And this is a 5 micron cube of neural tissue. In fact, the reconstruction of this is one of the major applications of AI to this field. But let's look at this. The yellow core of this is a dendrite. It is one of the nerve branches. The green thing you're seeing across here is an axon. And imagine this 5 micron cube absolutely jam-packed with these dendrites and axons. It'll probably have 1,000 axons traversing this at different angles, okay? And the little red dots are in fact perhaps at least to my way of thinking, and maybe to some extent in neural network literature, it's also crucial. Those are the synapses. Those are the connections. And so, but the connections are not simple. And this is one of my favorite illustrations of that. That is a presynaptic boot. It's just the one side of the connection. It's half a micron across. And all the little lovely little twirls and blobs and dots and so on you see are protein molecules. Think of them all, every one of them as a computational element. Okay. And so we've scaled down from 1.5 liters to 0.5 microns, a cube of 0.5 microns, and it is absolutely jam-packed with computational machinery. And this is how the brain does what it does in such small volumes and with such efficiency. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just give you a very big picture here. 4 main domains in which AI and neuroscience intersect and can certainly learn a lot from each other. Number one is sort of the zero order, the obvious thing to do, which is analyze experimental data, of which there's tons. Simulations, some of the fundamental concepts, and I'll end with a fling at philosophy. That's always a dangerous place to go, but it's kind of fun. Okay. So experimental data. So this is just a very short list of the kinds of things that one does with experimental data in neuroscience. For example, I think Adi uses it. Many people use something called deep lab cut, which is basically you train a neural network to look at an animal running around. You identify salient points like the nose of the rat or its tail, and then the neural network can look at a movie and say, this is the exact coordinates of the animal in time. Okay, so that's just one very simple example. Many people use it. There's the classification of activity. Nowadays, one can record from 100,000 neurons at the same time in a living, running around organism. How do you make sense of it? And one of the many ways in which we make sense of it is to actually ask a neural network, can you figure out what the animal was doing or what it was remembering or something like that? So this is another kind of thing that one does with AI. Connectomics, the problem of figuring out those 10 to the 14 or so connections in the brain through serial EM section is a hugely nasty one. And it's one which has greatly been accelerated in recent years through the use of AI techniques. Looking at neural coding, figuring out what the neural activity means in terms of what information is represented in there. And I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about multimodal data, which is something that we actually have as both a problem and an opportunity in the system at NCBS through a collaboration with NIMHANS and INSTEM. And hopefully we'll be able to take some of these approaches and possibilities further with a pan-TIFR neurocenter that is in the very, very nascent stages, but we hope that it will be a source of interesting challenges. Okay, so let me talk about ADBS, Accelerator Discovery Program for Brain Science. I think there's a few more qualifiers in there, but that's a good place to get started. So it's a really quite an extraordinary data set or collection of data sets. So as I said, it combines 3 major institutions. NIMHANS is the major neuro hospital here in Bangalore. It covers all of South India. NCBS and INSTEM is our neighbor on campus. Raghu is the coordinator of this at NCBS. There are, of course, coordinators at each institute. And I'm helping with the informatics of it. It's a fantastic data set. We have families with different neurological conditions, generations of them. So we have a huge amount of interesting genetic linkages in stuff there. They've done clinical, they've done neuropsychiatric, they've done functional infrared, they've done EEG, they've done MRI, they've done eye tracking, they've done genomics, proteomics. They have all of these data sets from these patients. You can take the blood from, we have taken blood from these patients, converted them into iPSC lines. We have cell lines from these. We can now express them and make neurons out of those. And now look at the physiology. So this is an absolutely staggering data set in terms of potential. And we're just getting to the point of putting it together. Just to put numbers in perspective, I know astronomy is notorious for astronomical numbers. We won't go there. But these are also reasonably big numbers, right? We have, out of 30 patients, we have 50 terabytes or so. For MRI, we have a few hundred patients. We're dealing with 40 terabytes. We're planning 1,500 patients and are going to follow them over 20 years. Yeah, but it's marvelously multimodal, and this is going to be a lot of fun to analyze. Okay, simulations. Actually, Shravan, you were saying something about speeding up your simulations. We can actually start to do the same with neuronal simulations. And I thought this was actually, I thought it was really funny when it happened, right? We're using a neural network to speed up a simulation of a neural network. This is completely bonkers, but anyway, it's nice. Okay, there's other problems in doing simulations, but suffice it to say that there's lots of applications here for neural network stuff. There's a lot of interplay of concepts, and I think this is this to me is the most interesting part of what one can do in this field. So for example, neural networks, obviously were inspired by looking at real neural networks. The whole idea of attractor networks has been hugely important in driving the ideas in the field. And it's sort of come full circle. We can now use some of the principles that Hopfield and others talked about a long time ago and apply them to known brain circuits. Here's another oldish example. This is the depression versus concave versus convex problem. And you can look at it and see it. So many years ago, Terry Sosnowski made a neural network that does this. And the reason I'm telling you this is that this neural network, he did something, again, like what Shravan said. He said, what is the neural network doing inside it? Can we extract some principles from what the neural network internally is doing? And what he found was that even though the network was trained on this problem, it yielded patterns of activity similar to what we see in our brains, which are trained on much, much more diverse kinds of problems. So the interpretation of this kind of orientation, selectivity, and so on may be just that these are side effects of a neural network doing the kinds of computations it's really supposed to do, like figuring out shape from shading. And this is something I'm very interested in. What are the computational benefits? Can we tell AI something by using time delays, which are usually thought of as an impediment to computation, at least in the digital computer sense? Can we use those time delays as part of the computation? Because the brain does that. Okay, I'm nearly done. So this part is hand waving and fun, but I think this is actually also maybe to me a core part of what we want to do. First of all, for all these centuries, millennia, whatever, ever since we started to ask, who am I and what am I doing here? There's been only one existence proof that from matter, you can get something like mind and intelligence. I won't even say the C word. It's a dirty word in neuroscience. Yeah. Okay, but you can get these things from matter, and that's been the one existence proof, is been in our heads. And now we're starting to get to the point where we have another existence proof. Our AI systems, we're starting to get things which can do some of these operations. Yeah, they can translate for you, they can predict protein structures. And the weird thing is that in both these systems, we don't know what the hell is going on. Yeah, we'd love to know. And I think that being able to understand what's going on to allow these networks to come up with these computations is, I think there's some fundamental isomorphisms there. I think that somewhere deep down, the way in which both the brain and neural networks encode the statistics of the world and then use them to extract hypotheses and generate ideas, I think this is a very, very important core similarity between these fields. And I think a lot has to be learned from that. Okay, so as I said, there are 4 key areas. I think all of these are ripe for fascinating collaborations. And yeah, we'd love to talk about it. Okay, and that still is a little bit ahead of your big fat machines. Okay, thanks. Any questions? No. There's a mic up there, just next to somebody.
Okay, so this might be a very naive question coming from an astronomer.
But are there ways where you can use real natural brains to simulate artificial intelligence? Can we train a natural brain, a set of neurons in a lab?
Well, that's what you do all the time, right? When you sit back and go to a chalkboard, and that's what you're doing. Huh? Yeah, you can do it. It's more of it's a very contorted way of doing it. It's a very hard way to do something which is much better done by entering it on a computer or just thinking about it. Yeah, you can do it well. Yeah, I mean, neurons are complicated. They can do these things. They're much more, real neurons are much more capable beasts, as I hope I conveyed, than your point neurons, which just do a information transfer function. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I have a question on, can you hear me?
Shravan is the boss.
Since you mentioned Hopfield, you and I back in the early days were together when he was doing this great stuff. Neural networks had that kind of initial, enthusiastic phase. Then they died, and then they resurfaced.
Yes.
And when I ask in layman terms, various people, they say we added more layers, and they started doing fantastic things. And as you indicated, perhaps, why did they start? Is there any understanding of why the extra layers started doing all these fantastic things that they couldn't do with humans?
No, so Sandeep, I think that comes to exactly the point I'm making. I think that this is where the sort of the more powerful mappings between the brain and the neural networks started to kick in. Once we are able to go through the many layers, and the brain has zillions of layers. Once you have the compute power and the data sets to train networks, they're still using backprop, man. That's archaic, but they're still using that to train these. But now that you have the layers and the training capacity, it turns out that it does things like what it can track your every move in real time if you are in a police state, which let's hope we don't get too far in that direction. And can do so many other good things as well, not just. So I think that has been the big transition, that we've got the capacity to do these things, and then it's throwing out the kinds of capacities that we take for granted in our own heads.
That's because ReLU is an activation function which can allow vanishing gradient problem to solve. That's the reason why it is.
Yeah, so I have one question. So I did walk in much later towards the end of your presentation. So it's a more broader question than what you presented. So from a cognitive science, neuroscience perspective, one thing that would be useful for machine learning that certainly I think we still don't know how to do very well and we would like to do is imitation learning. So like basically you try to imitate your elders, you try to imitate a master and apprentice relationship, a person tries to do something and then you try to imitate and so on. It seems like humans have an extraordinary ability to generalize. Like for example, if I teach you how to lift a plate of size 5 centimeter in diameter, you would lift a plate of size 10 centimeter in diameter. Of course, I mean, you must have reasonable ability, but yeah, potentially you can. But even such things are a bit hard for robots to do. And I think just neural nets alone is not quite the answer to those kinds of questions, or at least we do not know how to train them well, and maybe there is some other thing lurking.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting there. I mean, my way of looking at it is that this is actually an opportunity for us as both neuroscientists and as people studying AI to understand what it takes to be able to generalize. I mean, artificial general intelligence is, one of the holy grails, right? How do you generalize the way that humans do so effortlessly? I think that there's a lot of very interesting work happening in that domain. And I think that the insights from that are useful to neuroscience as well as to the artificial intelligence community. But yeah, absolutely. Yep.